Welcome to Journey to Esquire, the podcast. I'm Jocelyn Hardrick, founder and president of Diversity Access Pipeline, Inc., the company behind this podcast and other great programs, like Journey to Esquire Scholarship and Leadership Program, which provides $2,000 cash scholarships to third-year law students and internships to second-year law students, along with leadership training and mentors. And Journey to Esquire, the blog, which provides insightful articles to help navigate you through law school and beyond. Find out more on our website, www.journeytoesquire.com.
I'm here with my friend Mark Joseph. Mark is a graduate of the University of Florida and a graduate of Stetson Law, where we met. Mark not only got his law degree from Stetson, but also his MBA because he's an overachiever. So, Mark, thanks for being here today. I want to ask you some questions a little bit about pre-law school and your experience getting into law school, the actual experience in law school, the wonderful bar exam, and then life now as an uber successful solo practitioner. Did you know anything about what law school would be like or a career as an attorney before you applied to law school?
I had thoughts, right? I think everyone has thoughts before they go to law school. I specifically remember talking to people that were already in the field before I went to law school. I talked with someone who worked as a state prosecutor, and she kind of gave me her thoughts with regards to it and how rewarding it was for her. And it was something for me that I had kind of had in the back of my mind since high school. There was a family friend of mine who had always had this thought of going to be a lawyer when she got older, and she would talk about it with us. And I was like, I could probably do that. Besides the commonplace thought of being a doctor, obviously, when I was a kid, I used to want to be a pediatrician. And that's kind of what my mom wanted me to be. I guess she was a little disappointed when I decided to go to law school. But yeah, I kind of always had a thought of what it would be like. I felt like it would be hard, a lot of work, and that I would have to dedicate most of my time to it. And that was true for the first semester of law school. It was very true for the first semester and the second semester. But, when you start law school, the students tell you kind of hit the learning curve after that, and it makes it a little bit more easier. And that was true throughout my experience up until, we studied for the bar exam, and then we had to put in 14-hour days. So yeah, my expectations were consistent with what I believed they were going to be before we started.
So did I hear correctly that you are then a first generation attorney?
Yes, as far as I know. No one's ever mentioned anyone else being an attorney before, but I could have had, great grandparent or something like that in Haiti that was represented. I have no clue, but I think I am a first generation attorney and both sides of my family. So
okay,
it's nice. And my mom's not so disappointed. She's very happy.
there you
They've always
go.
supported they've always supported my decisions.
That's good.
Yeah.
When you decided that you were applying to law school, did you have any sort of vision of what you wanted your life to be like as an attorney? And that was something that weighed into your decision to go to law school?
I wanted to do something business related and law related. I wanted to be able to assist people using the legal system. I think that is the best way to be able to help people. Laws dictate everything we do as a society. Look, society is law. I thought that that was going to be the most effective way to be able to do that. But at the same time, I wanted to get into business because my parents were business owners growing up, and I saw the work that they put and I saw the reward that they got for it. Well, it wasn't always for the time that it was. The reward was there. And for them, they enjoyed their lives more being able to do their own thing, plan their own course for life. And for them, it was chiropractors, right? They owned chiropractors, and which is kind of why I wanted to get into personal injury. We used to work with an attorney who would, take on some of our cases, unattached cases, and help out with those for my clients or my parents' patients. And that attorney I went to work for after law school. I had a great amount of respect for him. Before law school, I wanted to get into, something business related and in the legal field. And I thought I was going to do corporate law or tax law, but that ended up not happening as I went throughout law school and I was interning for the law firm that I worked for out of law school. They kind of convinced me to go the PI route, personal injury route. And that's what I did.
Weigh it all in your decision for the law schools that you applied to?
No. No, it didn't. What weighed on my decision for the law school is to apply to, and it really was just Stetson. I might have applied to one other one, but I went to under UF, and I had a professor who is a magistrate judge over there in Alachua County, the courthouse over there, and he was very particular about what schools were nourishing for individual students. Right. And Stetson was at the top of the list. He believed that the teachers there, the faculty there really invested in their students. And he quite frankly recommended it to me as a place that I would be a good fit for. And so that's where I went. It was really the only school. I think there was another school. Don't recall. It might have been FSU, but yeah, so I applied there and obviously I got in, met a lot of other wonderful people. But he was very adamant. There were schools he was just like, don't touch. And it was, the schools he said, are good to go to were on one hand, right? If I were missing a couple fingers, that would be the number. And there were a lot of schools in Florida who's just like, don't go to that, right? And there are different schools that helped you, prepare specifically for the bar exam as opposed to practicing as an attorney. And Stetson was a school that, geared you towards actually entering into the legal field and practicing as an attorney. We've got the number one or top three at the very least now, trial advocacy board, right, and dispute resolution board in the nation. So the work that they do in preparing people to be able to practice law is immense. And I definitely got that there when I was at Stetson, for sure.
Right. And I remember that being an important consideration when trying to decide which specialty to go into. At least you knew that you were at a school that had the curriculum that could prepare you regardless of which direction you decided to go. I'm curious to know if you could tell me a little bit about what your experience was your first year of law school when you were learning more about Stetson and what they had to offer you as a student and how you navigated that as a first year law student or second year law student.
Yeah, I mean, look, you enter law school at orientation, they make a big deal about it, right? The advocacy program at Stetson, and then rightfully so, because at the time it was number one in the nation, right? And so that was their forte. And from the moment that we sat at our orientation, we heard a lot about it. I think almost everyone was like, that's what I want to get into. Right. There are a few that were like, nah, I want to go to transaction route. But even still, I think in dispute resolution on that team, right, there's the moot court, there's trial court, and then there's dispute resolution. The dispute resolution team, there are things geared towards that as well, right, or the transactional side of things. So I think for everyone, your thought process was, I want to do this. For me, initially, I don't know that it actually was right off the bat, even though I had been recommended by my professor. Initially, I didn't know that that's really what I wanted to do. But as we sat there, as we, gone throughout the first year and the boards opened up, I made a last minute decision. I was around friends who were like, hey, let's do that. I'm going to do this. I'm going to try for the trial team. I'm going to try for the moot court team. And I was just like, all right, Mark, don't be the typical you, right? At least try to get involved in something. Normally, I will go throughout school, undergrad, doing nothing. I'm content just to do my schoolwork, hang out with my friends, and let that be it. But here I wanted to at least invest more in myself in that regard. And it throws me back to one of the reasons why I got into law school, why I really wanted to go to law school is because I wanted to do a better job at putting myself out there in the public speaking realm, which I had always been super frightened of growing up, right? I did a lot of it weirdly enough, but I'd always been frightened of it and I wanted to get better at it, right? And so I thought that law school, in addition to being able to assist people in the legal realm, would be a good way to do that because we're always in front of people. We're in front of judges, we're in front of courtrooms and having to educate people in that regard. And I thought it would be something that would be helpful to that end. It seems like a weird way to go about it doing it, but it's what I want. And I remember that when I was sitting in class with my friends and they were talking about going into, one of these teams, it's like, look, this is kind of why you got into this, so that you can put yourself out there, get rid of some of those fears that you have, right? And so I did it. I ended up applying for the dispute resolution board and made it, and it was really good. And it's very helpful. So that first year was kind of a stepping stone for me to be able to do that, and it paved the way for the remainder of my time at Stetson.
There are a couple things you said that I think are really relatable to a lot of law students. The first one being that fear of public speaking. I think if you don't go to law school, you have a lot of people who don't understand why you would go to law school if you had stage fright, right? But I think a lot of our classmates shared that. And even if you were going out for one of the advocacy boards, that didn't necessarily mean you had all of the confidence in the world. I think it's important, like you said too, to kind of face that fear. What I'm curious to know is if trying out for the advocacy board was the only thing that you did to kind of face that fear, or if there were classes that you took or professors that you spoke with that helped you address that fear.
Yeah. A trial class. What was it called? Trial class? I think it was trial
The
class.
pre-trial class or trial advocacy. I
Trial
remember what you're
advocacy,
talking
yeah,
about.
yeah. Trial advocacy, I think, in that regard, right, with respect to public speaking, wasn't a mandatory class. It was something that, we had some of the best trial professors, really good ones, and I didn't, necessarily believe it until I saw them in class. They were very good, and I was very happy that I took that class my last semester. A lot of students had taken it their second year in the beginning. And I held off a little bit, but I think that was one of the classes that really helped with regards to that. It's one that I can remember. Pre-trial was a little bit different. Pre-trial, with Professor Bean and Ted Caratinos, is on the opposite end of that spectrum because you're dealing with things where you're not necessarily in front of a mass amount of people, right? It's you dealing with individuals, right? You dealing with defense counsel. And in that particular instance, pre-trial, Ted Caratinos is a personal injury attorney. He does plaintiff's work. And so that's kind of how he geared towards it, right? But I had an opportunity to be a TA for that class for 3 semesters, and I absolutely loved it because part of my practice is pre-trial, right? A lot happens in that first phase before litigation, particularly with personal injury. Not so much with the commercial litigation because it's in the name, you're already in litigation, but personal injury and property damage disputes, an immense amount of work happens in that first phase, right? You've got to do your investigation into a claim, right? You've got to get medical records. You've got to get demand letters out. You've got to circulate drafts for complaints to get into litigation. And those are all types of things that we kind of went over in that class, which again goes to that investment in students in preparing them how to practice, which was just beautiful. And I remember you being in the class, obviously, as your TA,
Yes.
and a few other students, which made that semester very good and fun. But it was one of those things where you put yourself out there, not knowing the answer to something, being entirely wrong. It's not hard, but like wrong in front of the whole class. And there was a beauty to it because you guys learned a lot and you started drafting things that are useful to this day, right? But yeah, pre-trial and trial are two different, on two different ends of the spectrum with what they did, but both of them prepare you to practice as an attorney, not to take an exam, but to practice as an attorney. And those really, if I had to say it, what were the most valuable classes? It would have been those two, to be quite frank. Pre-trial and trial advocacy, the most valuable classes at Stetson. And I wish, everyone took pre-trial because some point you're dealing with insurance agent, right? And you're dealing with some type of claim unless you're doing transactional work. And it becomes very apparent that, if you don't have some sort of knowledge in that area, you're equipped to handle an insurance adjuster or even just a company that you're dealing with. Maybe it's an employment dispute or something along those lines, right? So it's something that's very important to be able to know and to learn. And I'm very happy that I had it for 3 semesters, but I also took the class, right? So it's four semesters being exposed to that.
I think that's a really good point, especially if you're a first generation attorney, when you don't know what that practice looks like after law school, and you have a class where you're able to gain insight. There are some students who will go out and get a job either in the summer or during law school working part-time for a law firm. But I think sometimes people will take a different path, and having that pre-trial class that you take where you can learn those skills. And like you said, the trial advocacy class that is not mandatory. And I don't know about you, but even though I took it, I was still grateful it wasn't mandatory because I think it was kind of that necessary growth point in the law school experience where you said, I'm not going to miss out on this opportunity to learn from some of the best trial attorneys. And I think that's something that, from what you're talking about with the classes, made a really big impact on how you progressed throughout law school. And kind of moving on to your 3L year, right? In a way, because you're preparing for the bar, but also you kind of get to relax a little bit because your grades are pretty set and the routine of studying and whatnot. So how would you say you went into your 3L year and how that differed from the prior 2 years?
It's exactly that. It was more relaxed, right? The first year, you don't know what you're getting into. You don't know that you're going to be reading 80 pages a night for just one class, right? And on top of that, you get to choose your classes, unlike the first year. So you can balance that, right? If you want to spend more time focusing on the bar exam, then you can do that. Or if you want to take classes geared towards that, you can do that, which is fine. And they offered those types of things. But, it was more relaxed for sure in that regard. The bar exam, looking towards that, I didn't have, there wasn't really much fear there for me. There's not much that I stressed about or I stress about, right? And that time there wasn't, at the very least. The bar exam wasn't one of those things, right? I knew that there was going to be a time set for that. It was towards the end of the second semester, right? It didn't interfere too much with school as it was, at least not for me. Throughout that whole year, really the most stressful thing was probably trial advocacy and preparing for that and going through that class. But like you said, I do love what you said with regards to being happy that it wasn't mandatory, because making that choice to take the class does show pretty big growth, particularly if you're someone who wants to get into litigation but has the fear of public speaking. You find it daunting and you don't want to take that step. But I think after 2 years, getting into your third year, there are things that you could do that you didn't know that you could, right? And being on one of the boards kind of proved that, right? And the funny thing about one of the boards is that the teachers didn't choose the people that had the most confidence or who wasn't as nervous, right? They chose the people that were, but that they saw could sit there and convince someone on the other side. And a lot of times those were people with the shaky hands. They kinked that out of us pretty quickly into it. So there was a beauty there. But, the third year, it was just a lot easier than the first and second year. You knew what you were doing. You're a veteran at this point. Not perfect, right? There are curveballs everywhere, but you hit the learning curve after that point and you knew what to expect. And so I think that made it all the more better and easier for us as students. Now, again, the bar exam, that's something that had been on the horizon since the first year. And so you had expectations, you had your materials prepped, right? You're ready to hit it. And we hit it. And we spent, hopefully probably 12 to 14 hours a day. If you didn't, well, I think there's statistics in line with how long you study and how much time you put in, I should say, right? There's a thing to be said for efficiency, but there's also a thing to be said for putting in the time. And if you put in the time, you generally made it.
Right. And something that you mentioned too, kind of the difference between how you approached your course load and maybe just balancing that with your personal life, because by the third year, I think we actually realized we can have a life outside of law school and you can go to class and then go hang out with friends. Whereas 1L year, maybe you think, you have to have those blinders on. So can you tell me a little bit about what you did to have that balance so that you weren't just hyper focused throughout law school, what you were involved in, or kind of how you unwound?
I did take quite a few walking around campus. That's how I unwound, was walking. And that's just generally true. It's been true for a good portion of my life. Just going for walks helps me clear my mind, particularly, weirdly enough, walking in circles. Like literally just walking in circles will help me focus and concentrate school and what I was studying and helping me get a clearer picture. There'd be times I would be frustrated sitting there in the library trying to understand a concept that I just couldn't get. And I just have to get up and take a walk and come back and I'd be able to get it. And so those were actually very instrumental for me. But apart from that, I spent a lot of time in that library, right? I don't
Yes.
know that I'm the person to ask about unwinding. But that being said, I did spend a lot of time in that library with friends in between study breaks and just generally taking breaks, going there to hang out with people that were on campus at the time that didn't have the same schedule as me. Going to the cave, a little study area up there on the second floor of the library was a downtime for me sometimes when it wasn't filled with studying, when there was, a group of us in there. So for me, what changed was, I think, how much time was dedicated towards looking at the books versus just taking breaks throughout the years, right? I think other people going to O'Matty's or the other bar down there was their thing. And I didn't go out there much because I wasn't really big on drinking. And honestly, well, I'm not going to disparage the places, but it's just not my place. But I agree with you. I think, over the 3 years, you start to realize that, hey, I can take time away from studying or reading and looking at the book and I'll be fine, right? I know how to synthesize things better now. I can get through pages quicker. My notes are on point and I'm just overall more efficient. So I have time to set apart to go do these things with my friends. And I think for me in particular, instead of going downtown, Gulfport, going out in St. Pete was something that happened more prevalently. Going to grab a bite to eat out there was something that happened a lot more often. And it was nice to be able to do that. It was nice to be able to get to a position mentally, to be able to mentally afford to do that. And so there's a beauty to it. And I think for anyone and everyone who goes through that process, it's the same. Generally, you just hit that curve and you're able to do more with your time. Even as a practicing attorney, it's a lot different from my first year to now. I still work a lot because I own my own practice, right? It's me having to do most of the drafting and stuff like that. I've got legal assistants that can help with certain things, but at the end of the day, everything's on me. And it's more than just law, right? It's administrative stuff as well. So for me, it's a little bit different, but over the years, you understand more about your area, right? How long it's going to take you to prepare for a mediation or an arbitration or a deposition. It used to be 3 hours or 4 hours for me to prepare for a deposition. Now it'll probably, quite honestly, take 30 to 40 minutes going through notes and looking at materials and the elements that I want to hit, right? And you learn that, as opposed to the beginning of the practice, not to be so scripted, right? Or to be, you're scripted in the beginning, and as time comes along, you loosen up and to think just off the cuff of your head and go off of questions in the moment, right? Just being curious in a deposition specifically. And
Right.
so things change over time, right?
Right.
And that was true for all 3 years of law school.
It's funny how it's kind of similar in practice, how it is in law school. Your first year, maybe everything you highlighted or the way you took notes, or in my case, tabbing each case and having everything super organized, versus 3L year where you knew what to look for. You knew how to do a case analysis. It seems first year, of course, you're new to the game. It's different than where you are now a few years later, where you've had the experience and it's a matter of learning those skills that are transferable from what you learn in law school, not even necessarily the material, but how to balance your time, how to prioritize, and knowing, like you said, when to take a break. I think I want to touch a little bit on your bar exam experience, right? Because we have plenty of our scholars who are going to look at this and try to find some advice. I love that you talked about the walks that you would take and what works for you. I think it sounds like you would agree that you really have to find what works for you personally, because you said you weren't a very high stress person, but you knew what worked. Did you continue doing the same thing to unwind while you were studying for the bar exam? Or would you say it was different because maybe the different level of...
The walks were it for me, to be honest. The walks were a good laugh, right? Every once in a while, Rinaldi would come over to the cave. George would be there as well. And we would have a good laugh. I think that helped actually tremendously, to be honest with you, to step away from the stress of things. And so, but really the walks was probably the number one thing to help me unwind. And I agree, it's different for everyone. Everyone's got their own thing. Everyone's got their own thing. I can't tell you what that is, what that's going to be for you. But, if it's something that isn't harmful for your body, I'd say dive into it, right? And give yourself that time to be able to do that, because the amount of time you do have to put in a day is immense. And it's not even, that was different from law school. I don't think I was spending 14 hours a day studying things. I was spending a good amount of time, but I was also balancing work, interning for my law firm, the law firm I was at when I graduated and I started with before law school. So, my attention was divided in that regard. And I was putting in a lot of time, but there's a difference between 10 hours and 14 hours, right? And the difference is 4 hours. And so going through that process of studying for the bar it's taxing. It's very taxing mentally and physically because you're sitting there and you're not doing anything. Well, hence why I had to get up and do walks. And my gut grew, a couple centimeters and just sitting there with all the brisk iced tea that I was drinking and all the sugar I had to keep myself awake. I wasn't like everyone else. I didn't drink coffee, right? The way I got myself through the day was just tons of sugar. It's always how I've gotten myself through the day. It's just tons of sugar. And I didn't realize that until law school, until I was studying for the bar and people started pointing out, man, you go through like 10 brisk iced teas a day, man, and like 3 muffins. It's like, what? Me? Yeah, well, I do. And I did. I don't drink brisk iced tea that much anymore. But yeah, I would single-handedly empty out the shelf. I would, to be honest with you. And then I would just have Renard and George bring me brisk iced tea when I was looking like I was slouching. So yeah, it's immense. I think for people that are looking towards taking the bar exam and don't know it, it's their first time, right? Expect to put in a lot of time. It's not the same for everyone, but I can tell you a lot of people who didn't pass were the ones that were putting in 8-hour days, right? And there were very few people that could get away with that. The amount of content you get through, and I'll say that firsthand because I think I made it through like 72% of the material that I was working on, to be quite frank with you.
Yes.
Themis. Yeah. I used Themis for when I studied. A lot of people used Barbary and did well with that. But I ended up using Themis and, they had a recommended percentage to get through and I didn't hit that percentage. I just didn't. Took my time going through the material that I did go over, making sure that I understood it well. Right. I think a lot of times for people, it's a racing game, just trying to get to 100%, but you don't necessarily need to do that. And it's probably honestly not the best way to do it. Right. Which is why there's a recommended percentage to get through. And so when you're looking at going through those courses, I would say for you, yeah, try and get through as much as you can reasonably get through while being able to retain the information and adequately understand it. To the point you start sacrificing that, then you probably need to slow down a bit, right? Versus those who put in that time. And so I would say you're not hitting those marks of that range of time, then make sure you are and push yourself to get through it. But take the breaks that you need to mentally not blow a gasket, because that's the last thing you want to do. And a lot of people reach that point right before the exam, and you don't want that to happen. Because then you're not going to be able to think straight.
Do you use anything other than your bar prep course to prepare? I know Stetson had bar prep coaches they assigned to us. Did you use yours or did you talk to maybe any other attorney or former law?
I did not, no. Oh, I did talk to other law students, right? But I didn't use any coach. I actually might have went to go sit in someone's office once for like 20 minutes or something. But no, I didn't really use them. No. And I think there was the Adaptabar. I remember people the Adaptabar was one of those things that Stetson allowed you to utilize a certain amount of questions for free or something like that. And I wanted to get through. By the time we maybe 3 weeks before the exam or 2 weeks before the exam, I had, John and Cy, I've gotten through 1,000 Adaptabar questions. Georgia got through a couple hundred and sitting there, going through it. And I was just like, I haven't even touched this stuff yet. Literally, by the time I took the exam, I think I only touched 3 Adaptabar questions. So I was just sitting there doing Themis the whole time. Didn't do any Adaptabar. It was no more than 5. I think it was about three multiple choice questions that I sat through and I got through. But it helped those people who were able to get through it. So good on them. Me, I wanted to do them, but I was just like, this material, I'm already doing this. I'm still trying to, wrap my mind around this. And my pace is just slower than other people. But again, it worked for me because I had a handle on the material that I was going on and well enough to do pretty decently on the exam, both exams. So I was pleased with my score. I was pleased with the fact that I passed.
Any bar prep coach listening to this who hears that you only did 5.
So
No.
go to your bar prep coaches. They are there. They are a resource for you to use. Use them. Don't be like me. Go to them. They're going to make things a lot easier for you, and it'll be more efficient for you at the end of the day. And I'm sure I would have been able to get through more material had I utilized them. So do use them. I'm definitely not the standard that anyone should be holding this. I can get away with doing some ridiculous things, not because I'm super smart, but just because of God's grace on my life. And it's different for everyone. So, just understand yourself and move accordingly. Use the resources. I have a tendency of being negligent in that regard.
Can't remember. Were you still working part-time while you were studying for the bar exam, or did you stop completely?
I think it was a negligible amount of work that I was doing. I don't think it was a lot. I do recall my boss has been like, hey, we understand you have the bar exam. Take some time to focus on that. I do think there were some assignments that I knocked out because I wanted the money to come through, and I was investing heavily in the stock market. I remember that time. It was so great. I was doing anything I could to get more money to put in the stock market. I actually went to Stetson. I was like, hey, I need more money because I wanted to put it in the stock market. But the weed stocks, maybe that's inappropriate for this, but there were like some stocks out there that I made some great returns, and I was just trying to bump that stuff up. But yeah, so I wanted to work more so that I had more to put in. But I ended up not working nearly as much. I ended up trying to focus on just studying. So
now I know
yeah.
where that time was spent, not in your bar prep coach's office. You were trying to do the investment.
It was the market. It was good. It was fun. I was on one of those apps that you can trade stocks on and things like that. Yeah, I was on that, man. I absolutely loved it. And I like risk a lot. Like it gets me excited. I have a problem with it. Like I like taking on risk. And I took on some risk, and it paid off. It was nice. It was nice. And I just wanted to I wanted to put more in. I don't have a gambling problem. I don't have a gambling problem. I'm good, but that's an aside.
I think that's fair. But you know what? I think it's still a very valid point to kind of take into consideration that there are students who still either want to or need to make money while they're studying for bar prep. I've had mentees in the past who have mentioned that they don't know what they're going to do because they have to pay for housing, or if they're on scholarship or need to work. So I think it's still nice to hear that there's someone out here who found a way that you can make money and still have a little extra cash flow, and in a way also have a break from studying that still was productive, not just sitting around and sitting in the stress. But what I want to kind of touch on is what you said, that you're not afraid of risk, which, if you can't tell from my tone, is very different from how I am. And I think part of that is just upbringing and whatnot. But maybe, do you think that was a reason why you decided to go ahead and open your own law firm when you did fairly early? So how long after law school and passing the bar did you practice for someone else before you opened your own law firm?
Before we hop into that, disclaimer, I don't want to tell you guys the stock market is the way to make money during law school. Okay? I don't want anyone to be like, hey, this is how I'm going to make it. You will lose money in the stock. Let me say that you more often than not lose money in the stock market. If that's your goal of making money, you can work a job. And I did, right? I interned for a firm in Fort Myers. I'm currently in Naples, but Fort Myers is just right up the way. I interned for a firm. It's one of the same attorneys that my parents had known since I was born. When they had chiropractors, they had mutual clients. And one of the attorneys they were good friends with, I had them reach out once I knew I wanted to go to law school. I had them reach out to see if I could intern there. And I did that 8 months prior to going to Stetson. And I was fortunate enough that they gave me a job throughout law school, being able to draft some things and get it to them, doing research assignments and stuff like that. I had money coming in, and I wasn't just spewing out money, right? And that's possible. That is possible for anyone who wants to do it. It's just about, again, understanding yourself, your limits, and what you can handle, what you can't. And also having someone who's gracious enough just to be able to send you small assignments that you can work through in your spare time, right? And not have too great of expectations. So if you have those things, you can most certainly do it. You don't need the stock market to financially support yourself or to try and make it big. So after, when I was in law school, they made me an offer to come join as an attorney. And I loved working with those guys. I did. I absolutely loved working with them. I worked for them for maybe a year and 10 months. I graduated. We passed the bar in September, right? And so most of us became licensed practicing attorneys in September. And so I worked as an attorney for them from September of 2019 to June of 2021. And it's when I quit. And I quit because there was some stuff that happened at work that I wasn't pleased with. And I fully intended on staying there for quite a bit longer. And who knows, maybe I'd still be there today. Maybe I would work there for the rest of my life. I don't know, right? But again, I always said I wanted to do something business related and law related. Maybe that was practicing in corporate law or owning my own practice. I don't know where that was going to lead me, or didn't know where that was going to lead me. But some things happened at work that I wasn't pleased with, that I was like, you know what, I don't know that I'm a good fit for this place anymore. And so I left, and I left on the spot. Like, I was very upset, and I was just like, I'm out. And I didn't think about my next step. I didn't know what I was going to do in the moment. I had no clue. I took a month to myself because I hadn't taken a vacation since August when I got back to the firm after law school. I hadn't taken any time off. I had just been working, and I would work long days because I had a lot of work to do, and they gave me a lot of assignments. And I was very grateful for that, for the exposure that I had. But I ended up literally, I was working, probably 12 to 14-hour days sometimes. And so I remember I'd be there late at night. I'd go home, take a shower, come back, be there, and next to my PJs, pretty much, I'd be in there. And we had my office had like a big glass window. I could see outside near First Street, and the lights on in my room. And I would always see the same people walking by. They're like, get out of there, go get a life. Be like 10 at night. Like, I got work to do. And by the time I left, I was exhausted. And so I took a month off, traveled a little bit, and tried to figure out what I was going to do. It's like, well, are you going to go work for someone else? You're going to apply somewhere else? Or are you just going to do your own thing? And I was like, you know what? I could do it. Why not? And that was the thought. The thought was like, why not? Right? I could do it. It wasn't, for me, there was never any doubt. I've always been a man of faith, and I've always believed and understood in my life, things generally work out in the end. They just do for me by God's very good grace. And this is one of those things where I was just like, look, even if I stumble, even if I fail, it's not truly a failure. It's a matter of perspective. It's a matter of the lessons that you learn. And so for me, the perspective was, regardless of what happens, you will succeed. Regardless of whether you put in money and time into this and nothing comes of it, at the end of the day, you will succeed. You have learned something about yourself. You have learned something about the law. You have learned something about business. And so I had no doubt. I said, let's do it in July 21st. Let's do it. Let me do the business filing, and let's see what we can do. And I told my parents what I wanted to do. And they supported me. I left Fort Myers. I moved back in with them for a little bit until I got my I left Fort Myers, moved to Naples, back in with them for a few months until things started working out. And it didn't work out immediately. They most certainly did not. I did sign up a few cases in that first month, which I was very excited for. But, for me, the practice areas I think I mentioned earlier are personal injury and commercial litigation. When I left the firm I was at, I had maybe 245 cases, most of them personal injury protection. But people don't know this, but at the time, before the laws changed, you could get your attorney's fees for filing those cases. And I normally, on average, settled those cases for about $3,000 to $4,000 at the firm that I was at. And it was good money, very, very good money for the firm. And I left it. I didn't want anything from them. I left everything. And a lot of times, you'll have attorneys that take their caseload that they're working on, if the clients choose to go with them, into their new practice or into opening up their own thing. And for me, I don't know if it was pride. I don't know if it was just not wanting bad blood between myself and the firm. I think it might have been the latter. But I decided, you don't need to take any of those cases. You don't. You'll be fine on your own, and things will work out. And so I left all of them. I didn't take one case, which at 3,000 to 4,000 for a lot of those, let's say maybe even half of them settled. It's a lot of money. And so though they had those, I left. I let my parents know what I was doing and they supported me and they put the word out. And I was able to sign up a few PI clients. So personal injury, commercial litigation. Signed up a few PI clients, I think maybe 20 that first month, which sounds great. And it was great because you knew in the future you were going to get paid on them. But in the moment, you don't get anything, right? It's contingency. You're the one who's actually spending money to push the cases forward. And so for 5 months, 5 or 6 months, I made nothing. No, that's not true. I had a friend who wanted me to review a contract for him, and he paid me $500. So months I made $500. That's not easy. It's
No.
not for the faint of heart. Even if you're not paying rent at the time, it's not for the faint of heart. Yeah, I did that. I made $500, and then after that, I think in January of 2022, I settled my first PI case, and it got better from there.
Did you have a moment where, 5 months in, this is all I've made so far, maybe I shouldn't do this anymore? Or Mr. Risk, were you ready to just keep going?
I was ready to keep going. The thought is there. It's always in the back of your mind. But I saw the light at the end of the tunnel, and I knew it was coming. It was just a matter of time, and I just had to hold out until then. And I was fortunate again that in that first month of going out on my own, I signed up a few PI cases. So I knew it was going to come eventually. I just had to wait. And so I did. I waited and I settled one in January, and then I settled a few more, I think, in February. And fortunately enough, when you do that work well enough, people support you and they put your name out there.
Yes.
And so I was able to do that and then market a little bit the commercial side, which is good for billables. Although I hate billables, absolutely hate tracking time. I think most attorneys do that have to do it. I much rather the contingency. And then part of my practice, I try to gear towards a quasi-contingent agreement, even on the commercial stuff. I'll be like, I'll take a portion and you'll pay me an hourly rate or a flat fee to begin with. Or sometimes it's just straight billable. But there are most certainly moments in that period of time where it's like, things could be easier, but I didn't want to go back. I wanted to press forward and stick to my guns. And so we did.
So let's talk about that a little bit, kind of what your experience has been as a solo practitioner. First of all, was Naples the decision because you needed somewhere to stay, or did you always have this kind of idea of wanting to go back to Naples to practice?
I didn't always have the idea of going back to Naples. I think after I left, it made the most sense, right? It's where I had the most connections to help me grow as a small practice, right? My parents knew a lot of people in the community, and it helped me get word out, right, that I'm doing PI, personal injury in the area, right? And so I knew that I would have more chance of success operating there than anywhere else. For me, it was the wisest move I could make, and it's paid off being here. And now I take cases throughout Florida, and I'm able to do work for people, who are in Orlando who have an issue, right? Or in Tampa or in Tallahassee. So, and that's because I cultivated the connections here. There wasn't always the thought, but it made the most sense in the moment.
Okay. And you've been around for a few years now. So I'm curious if you could tell me about kind of what the values are that are really important to your firm to be connected to Joseph Law and the people you hire included. What's important that you want to make sure that is conveyed throughout your business?
Integrity. Integrity is very important, and character is very important. I don't want to disparage anyone of the practice, but the reputation of attorneys truly does precede them. And I've come across some attorneys that I'm like, I don't ever want to get to a point in time where I feel like I need to stoop to a certain level to be able to succeed on a case, right? I want to be able to be cordial to you, kind to you, understanding to you, not necessarily being a pushover to you, right? Or giving you everything you request, but being understandable and reasonable and just a kind individual. That's very important for me, and maintaining that aspect of myself or cultivating that aspect of myself and the practice is very important to me. And so the people that I have working for me are kind individuals, right? Smart individuals, hardworking individuals, kind individuals, right? Who, when they reach out to clients, the clients, when they speak to me, compliment me on that. I love to hear things like that. And I do hear things about like that. Reaching out, clients, client management or interaction, right, is very important, right? Because if you don't make a good first impression or just a general impression on them, they're not going to come back. They're going to go somewhere else where they feel like they're respected or they're heard. And when my staff talks to them or when I talk to them, it's very important that we make sure that they know that they are being heard and their issues are being addressed, their issues are being written down, noted, and it's something that we're going to make a priority because that's what they hire us for. Integrity is very important for the practice. I not only want our clients to understand that and to know that, but I want our colleagues to understand that and know that as well. Despite how I'm dealt with by them, things aren't going to change on my end. And hopefully in the future, someone who wants the same values decides that maybe they're done with the practice that they're at. They want to come and join something like that because that's what they relate to as well.
That's a really great point. And I think especially with our generation, there are some stereotypes that we deal with as millennials of, we're young, we're inexperienced, maybe we want to take the easy route to do things. But it really sounds like you've invested the time and energy into deciding how you want to be portrayed. One of the great things that you said was you're not a pushover. Your kindness is not to be confused for being a pushover. And it's a matter of being professional, being courteous, understanding that it's not just about the clients, the way you present yourself, but it's your colleagues as well, because that's how you're going to get referrals. I mean, I'm proud to refer you whenever I have someone that I can, because I know it's great that you said integrity. I was trying to think of a word to describe Mark Joseph and how you work. And I think that's the best thing to phrase is it's hard when you're not an attorney and you just consider us to be in this giant bubble of we're a bunch of liars. You can't trust an attorney. We're expensive and we lie, right? That's the basic thing. And the cost isn't really going to change. That's just how it works. But who you deal with and what the next generation looks like is so important. It's great to hear that you also are instilling the same values and it seems like you have those same values out of your employees so that the next generation that we have of law firm owners isn't just being catty just to be catty. What I'd like to know is how you handle differences as a young attorney when you're working with someone who's been doing this for a few decades, if you can tell me a little about that.
That's an interesting one because, Naples isn't known for being overly young. We have a lot of elderly people that live here, same with the practice of law, right? And my ends of court, and again, on my hand, I can count how many young lawyers there are. Not young in the sense that the young lawyer division is understood to be. That would be anyone that's, practicing within the last 7 years. I mean, just physically young, right? We don't have many physically young attorneys here. And so most of the individuals, most of my colleagues are older. And unfortunately, I've had my fair share of instances where it's felt like I've been talked down to because of my age, right? And there is truth to that, their experience does give them a certain amount of leeway to be able to if they say those things, right? Or to act that type of way. But you know what? I come in with an open mind that there are plenty of things that I can learn from each one of my colleagues. And I try to accept those things when I find them out or when they try to impart them on me, just being kind, right? Or if it's not meant to be kind, meant to be a little bit snarky, hey, I'm still winning because I don't know everything. And so I try and accept those things when I'm on the receiving end of someone who's being rude, right? Again, I try to be as cordial as I possibly can. I don't always succeed in it. I'm not going to lie. I don't always succeed in it. Sometimes I can push back sometimes, right? It's one of those things that I'm learning, cool heads prevail in the end. And so, like I said, I'm always winning when I have an opportunity to learn something from someone else who knows more than me and knows better than me. But I do have those exchanges, and other attorneys will have those exchanges as well. And I would just other young attorneys or people who have yet to become attorneys but are going to be, I would just encourage you to look at the positives of it. Truly, you don't know everything, and your job is to do the best for your client. And sometimes that's going to require you to humble yourself and take on those things, listen to those things that others are trying to impart on you, whether it's them being kind or whether it's them just being a jerk.
That's fair. What advice would you give then to someone who is brand new to the practice of law, or maybe in the, first few years, we'll say, and how to deal with conflict with opposing counsels, particularly from a different generation that maybe we're dealing with the stereotype of what a new attorney is like?
How to handle the conflict? You know what? I think sometimes the best way to handle it is just not to say anything at all. You don't have to respond back to every email. Not everyone requires a response. And I've gotten into those email wars before, paragraphs of, hey, this is what's going to happen. This is what I'm going to do, right? With regards to litigation and things like that. This is how I believe it's going to play out. Generally, they don't help negotiation process. Maybe getting on the phone and talking to the opposing counsel, I think that helps more than anything, to be
That's a
honest.
great
Because
point.
when you have someone on the other line, voice to voice or person to person, it's much harder to be a jerk, right?
Right.
It's much, much harder, right? There's something about it. You calm down. Emails, right? Texting, saying things via, you could do things all day long via caps and stuff like that to try and prove your point. But, you got to remember that that stuff's permanent, right?
Right.
And you don't want to have something out there that reflects poorly on you, poorly on your practice, poorly on your clients. Okay. And sometimes your clients would probably be happy to see an email go across like that, but it's not the right thing. And so I think a lot of times the best way to handle these types of situations for someone who is looking down on you is just not to respond back. If it doesn't require a response, if you don't need to provide them with that case law and add a snarky remark, don't,
Rise
right?
above.
If it's something where you need to send them a document because you're responding to a request to produce or give them something that is necessary pursuant to litigation, then do it. But if it's something that they're just remarks going back and forth, you can nip it in the butt then and there. Or you can give them a call to see if you can come to an understanding with regards to something that needs to happen. It's more likely going to happen over a call than it is via email.
That's great
So,
advice.
but you also at the same time, I get that, there's a need to want to have a paper trail for certain things, right? So after the call, follow up and say, just summarize your call. Hey, thanks for the call today. This is what happened. I just want to summarize that, make sure we're good to go. But, as far as the email wars or the snarky remarks or the rudeness, you don't have to respond to it.
That's really good advice. I love that. And you made me kind of think of something because of more advice that I think you're giving to the next generation. So you've been getting more involved in Diversity Access Pipeline and the Journey to Esquire program. Thank you, by the way. I'm very happy because I love having your involvement, especially as another Stetson alum, and a young solo practitioner. So what I would like to know is, why did you decide to get involved and kind of give back your time as someone who is very busy and running his own law firm? Why is it important to you to give back to the next generation of lawyers?
Well, really, the only reason why I got involved is because you asked. Anytime you ask me to do anything, I will. And I appreciate the card, by the way, the Christmas card. I always appreciate it. I don't tell you when I receive them, but I do appreciate them. But, loyalty has always been something that's been important to me, and you've always been a good friend. So that's the reason why I got involved in this initiative. I would have gotten involved in some initiative because I just generally like to give back, and I think it's important for growth to give back. I say that spiritually, but also physically. I've always found that when I give physically, it always returns back to me. It does. And I have no doubt that, the investments that I make will return to me so that I can make greater investments, right? And that's something that's very important. I love to give because I've been the recipient of people giving. I am the product of that. Any success that I have is by God's grace first, and the fact that He's allowed other people to invest time and money into me. And I want to be able to do that for others. And I think that really is the heart and the mission of Journey to Esquire. I think that's what you guys are trying to do because you were on the receiving end of that and you've seen how much it helped you in law school. I know for you in particular, you and Brielle, that, you were a part of this. It's something that I looked at the time. I was like, like everything else, I was like, do I need it? No, not really. But, it wasn't those things that I kind of overlooked, but there was an importance to it for you guys. And I'm sure if I had, taken a harder look into it, I would have found the value there too. And I think that everyone should take a look into it, knowing what I know now about it and what you guys do, right? There's a beauty to it and being able to take off some stress, maybe not a lot, but some stress in having other individuals who've been through it before, give you advice, right? Also support you financially to a small extent, scholarships, right? And so I think that there's a beauty to that. And for me, I do like to give back when I have an opportunity. I'm happy that I could do this in support of my friend and in support of future attorneys. And so I've got no regrets there. And hopefully I can get involved in some other stuff and other initiatives as God continues to bless the business.
That's amazing. And I love hearing about how your faith is in the forefront of so much of what you do. I think that's something that maybe some people are afraid to talk about, but it's just so nice to hear because I remember you being involved in, the Bible study group in law school. And, we've gone to church a few times together up here. And I think it's whatever someone is going to do to kind of have that centering voice in their head to stay level-headed and to have that motivation to keep going, like you mentioned before, you trust that everything is happening and the people are coming into your life at the right point. On a final note, do you have any final wisdom or advice that you would give to a law student who is about to take the bar exam, about to graduate law school because we're officially in spring semester?
Continue to challenge yourself in asking yourself, why not? Why can't I do this? Give yourselves reasons why you can't do it. I think you're going to find that there are actually few. Like I said before, for me, going out on my own was just a simple thought of why not? I weighed the options of everything that I had before me, and I thought about it. And maybe that's not for everyone. Maybe you can do it, but maybe that's just not what your desire is, and that is perfectly fine. Maybe you want a more relaxed life, right? Maybe you don't want to work 14-hour days. Probably not the best to do so. Anyways, I'm hoping to get to a point where I don't have to work those days, ideally. Maybe you want to spend more time with your kid because you have a kid, right? Or maybe you want to spend just generally more time with your family. There are reasons why, right? And there are valid reasons why not to do something. But if you're one of those people that have a desire to make something happen in your life, just ask yourself why not and take the step. For the bar exam, you're going to pass eventually. Like if you don't pass on the first try, you will pass eventually. I know people that have taken it 4 times and they've gotten there. And no one asks you how many times you took the bar unless they're a jerk. Most clients do not ask you about that because it really doesn't matter. I know people who are fantastic attorneys who took the bar 4 times.
Yeah.
For
Yeah.
whatever reason, they just couldn't pass.
Right. Because
I don't
sometimes
think
things
it's a
happen.
hallmark. Yeah, I don't think it's a hallmark of your intelligence or your capabilities as someone who can practice law. Okay. You
Yeah.
can come to understand anything, right? You can sit down, dedicate yourself to personal injury, and come to understand it. Just a matter of time. Being able to practice law really is about taking the step to be able to practice law. If you don't understand how to do jury selection, sit there, take notes. If you don't know how to do a deposition, but you know another attorney who does a lot of them, ask them if you can sit in on the deposition. You can learn those things, right? And so, the bar exam isn't a hallmark of your intelligence. If you've taken it a few times, don't be discouraged. It's easier for me to say as someone who's passed on the first time, but I've sat there with people who haven't, right? And I've seen the light in them remain, and they make it. And when they do, they are glorious as
Yes.
attorneys.
And there's
Okay, because
usually
they
a reason why
yeah.
it took something happened, or you are supposed to learn this lesson before you get into the practice, because it
Yeah.
is just as much a test that's trying to see about the material as it is what's your mindset going into a very difficult, stressful situation, and
Yeah.
you're going to learn
And
something from it.
And so for you, maybe not for you personally, Kim, but for people that are listening, maybe the question they're asking is why not take it another time after failing it twice, right?
Love that.
You've made it this far, you put in the time because you had a desire. Don't give up on it, unless you know that your calling is somewhere else. But continuously ask yourself why not and make steps to prove yourself why you can't. Continuously do that, and I think you'll be all right in this field.
That's great. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to sit here and chat and share some of your experience. I think there's definitely going to be a lot that resonates with some of our students and scholars, and especially young attorneys. So once again, we have Mark Joseph of Joseph Law, PLLC in Naples, Florida. Thank you.
Of course. Thanks, Kim. It's a pleasure.
Thanks for tuning in to another great episode of Journey to Esquire, the podcast. Support, share, subscribe. And for more, visit www.journeytoesquire.com.